Welcome to the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance podcast, where Native voices lead the conversation on conservation, stewardship, and our responsibilities to the lands and waters that sustain us. Across Indian country, our homelands carry stories of relationship, resilience, and knowledge passed down through generations of people who live with the land and listen to what it teaches. Through conversations with tribal producers, ranchers, conservation leaders, elders, and community partners, we share the teachings and experience that continue to guide how we care for the water, the land, and the living systems that surround us. Together across Indian country, we recognize the spirit carried in our waters, our homelands, and our ecosystems, and we honor our role as caretakers for those yet to come.
This is a conversation with Brandon Fish, recorded for the Indian Nations Conservation Alliance Traditional Ecological Knowledge podcast. Each episode captures Native American teachings about the natural world that have been passed down through tradition. Brandon Fish is a cultural knowledge keeper on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana and CEO of Mudman Creations.
My Indian name is Atsimpi, which is Fine Able Child. My other name is Mokoipita, which is Wolf Eagle.
Brandon is a millennial, bridging the gap between younger generations and elders in the community. He practices Indigenous teachings through his job with Blackfeet Community College and through his everyday life at Red Blanket Hill, a place he says is high in spiritual activity. Though many of his practices are steeped in tradition, Brandon prefers a different name for his body of knowledge.
Traditional Ecological Knowledge. I try to kind of stray away from that word. TEK. I mean, it's something that's broadly used, Really, the way this society is, anybody can use those words because they're from that area. So it's just the knowledge of their own area and, their own biosphere or whatever you want to identify that as. So I call it cultural ecological knowledge because a lot of what we're taught comes from, what we're shown and what we're told. The way that the English language works is through description and through, through your own interpretation of how we, how we utilize those words. But when it comes down to language, that is culture in itself, the language of the land. We call sweetgrass sabatsimo, but we also know where that plant comes from through our language and our stories. So sweetgrass was a plant of the sun. The sun gave us that plant. And then there's stories behind that plant on how it's utilized. So it's pretty peculiar how we need the sun to actually identify it. You have to be a part of the people's culture in order to know some of this stuff, especially the stories. The stories are really important when you're going after these plants because it specifically tells you what it's for. Versus a traditional ecological knowledge, anybody could have their own interpretation of what it's for. And then there's stuff online where you look at the medicinal properties and, the do's and the don'ts, but that's just a basic understanding of what the standard of practice is, I learned that out with my family. During our gathering stages, that's when we would actually be telling stories, talking about our family history. That's when we would be able to ask, some questions. As a child, I asked a lot of questions, and we weren't really told straight on, but we got to experience it. And it's in the experience itself that we're able to retain this knowledge because it's all passed on orally through experience.
Brandon's journey into cultural knowledge began when he was very young, and his parents encouraged him to learn traditional ceremonies.
So the cultural ecological knowledge It comes from, a lot of times it comes from our elders or our parents if they know. So a lot of the stuff that I understand, I learned through different ceremonies. Not the ceremony itself, but the preparation of the ceremony. My parents pushed me to take on these ways, from the songs to the language to plant identification and to our mental health. I didn't understand it at the time, so I thought everybody did it, but really nobody was doing it that way. I was 7 years old when I went into my first fast. I was 9 when I went into my first Sundance. And by the time I finished my 4 years, I was 15. When you commit 1 year to a lodge and you commit 4. So you start with 1 day, then you go 2 days, 3 days, or 4 days. What I did versus what other people have done was I hung out with my elders. One of them was my dad. He taught me about the sweat, the pipe ways, and how we are helpers in this world. That we call ourselves leaders, but really we're helpers. We're here to help people. And the other one I took on as an elder was Merle Yellow Kidney. He showed me about the Sundance. My ex-father-in-law showed me about the Okan and the bundles. So I got 3 different perspectives on our ceremonies and how it's to be approached. What it really comes down to is intention. A lot of what I was shown and what I was taught, I had to be there. A lot of this stuff you can't learn in a book. You can learn so much from people telling you until you experience it. Like with my dad, people see say a sweat lodge. You see it from the outside looking in. But what you don't see is everything that was done before that lodge was built, before that fire was started. What you don't see is the offerings that were put out, where we had to go everywhere and look for rocks. And then there's certain kind of rocks that we use. And there's certain type of wood that we use. So we have to go source out, we have to scout all this stuff out before that ceremony can start. There's certain types of willows that we use in those lodges, but it's all passed down through your teachers. One may use diamond, the other one may use red willow, others may use birch. It just depends on who your teacher is, who's showing you these things. There's no one right way. There's many ways. But also, you're laying a foundation of protection so that people can come and feel safe when they're in their most vulnerable state. So once you go into a sweat lodge, it's like going into a mother's womb. So we're getting everybody ready to go back into their mother, to sing, to pray, to go in there for intention. A lot of times when they go there, they're going there for cleansing, but also they're going there for others. And we don't do that stuff for ourselves. And that's the thing that people seem to, not get. Is we're not going there for ourselves. Then you have others saying, I'm here for my grandmother because she's dying of cancer. I'm here for my dad because he's on the street drinking and doesn't want to come home. I'm praying for my mother because she got stolen. That intention is powerful. So when you have that intention in your heart and you're there with meaning and purpose, then it evolves. It evolves how you're walking through this ceremony or how you're walking in life. It comes down to intention.
A familiar example that relates to many elements of traditional knowledge is sweetgrass, which demonstrates the power of intent and our dependence on animals that create the natural environments to grow medicines.
We go out and we get, you smudge with sweetgrass. Well, that in itself, with the strands that are interwoven with each other to create the braid, well, there's a process to that, and sometimes that process could take weeks, could take months of preparation before you actually go after the actual plant. And then during that time, if you have that plant, you're actually praying the whole time. You're quiet. You're allowing the sun to be able to identify it for you. Because what sweetgrass does, it hides. It's its own being, right? It's its own life. So if you were to go out and say you didn't know where to look, but you're being loud, you're being obnoxious, you're talking too much, well, it hides itself. It turns around. And then when you're quiet, you start to become more still, more calm, and, you go in there with intention. It's in that intention that allows you to be able to go, and that sweetgrass is really just giving its life to you. So this is why we honor our plants, because it's the life that they're giving us so that we can continue on with ours. So you're quiet, and then what happens is that you need that sun. So once the sun is out, the grass will turn around and it will shine. And that's how you know where that sweetgrass is. And then you would kind of feel it on both sides. One side is fuzzy, but the other side is slick. But then you would have to go down to the roots. And you look at the roots. It's usually purple. And that's how you know what sweetgrass is. I'm using sweetgrass probably because I'm growing sweetgrass myself. And, now we're becoming more I guess, successful on, how we actually are growing it in a controlled environment. When really what showed us how to grow it was beavers. That's just a stucky, because they already naturally have a way of creating environments themselves in watersheds. So, and this is where sweetgrass grows, is in those watersheds. So we've been trying to utilize, potting soil, buying it in bags, the soil, but our sweetgrass don't like that. They hate it. So they just, it goes away when we start using those other, types of soil. So part of what we had to do is we had to go back and observe where it's thriving. What is being used that we're not understanding. And part of that is beaver habitats. They created an environment that is, perfect for it. So if they're eco-managing the land, then we need to learn from those eco-managers. And, beavers are a cornerstone species that, help sustain those watersheds. So that's the idea of, trying to grow sweetgrass, is we need to put them back in something that's similar to their natural environment. So that means the mud on the beaver dams, but also all the Siita peaks, which is the water beings that come with it, then the other plants that support it. So when we try to, especially with native plants, if we try to just single out the one plant by itself, well, it might not want to, it probably won't be as supported as when you have these other plants with it. Sweetgrass, what I'm understanding is that, it likes a lot more light, but it also likes a little bit of wind. So we got to try to create those environments for it. But it just goes down to an understanding of those natural environments that we're trying to imitate or mimic. That's the way our native plants thrive, and they thrive in that. So we depend on our animals, to help us in that way. This is why we have animal last names, because they were our first helpers. They're basically our angels that showed us how to use these plants. They're the ones that showed us how to use them, how to manage them, and how to sow seeds. Like bears. Bears naturally do that for us. When they go out and eat savage berries, they'll leave it behind in their excrement. But when it goes through its digestive tract and through their whole system, then they are able to open up those seeds and create different trees in different areas. And the same thing when we watch bears, they go after a plant, and that is we call it bear root, osha. So when they're done hibernating, they go after that plant because it acts as a almost like a laxative. It cleans out their body and cleans up their whole system. So all these native plants, the intimate observation of our environments, they're the ones that taught us. They're the ones that showed us. So really, we're just passing on information that was shown to us through the natural.
The observational nature of Blackfeet teachings is clearly demonstrated through language.
Blackfoot language is more descriptive. Say we're talking about bears, so Buxikoi, which we call grizzly, but it actually means slobbermouth. It's descriptive to the animal. One is Bonokamita, which is horse, but Bonoga is elk, Imita is dog, Bonokamita, elk dog. So our language, it ties into, it really just ties into the land, because it was the land teaching us this. It wasn't us going around pointing at things saying, oh, well, we're going to name that this, or we're going to claim this. It was that area that named itself. And we're just interpreting it and relaying it through our voice.
After learning from the lodge in his youth, Brandon sought other experiences that added to his understanding of the natural world.
When I start learning about bison and how they are cornerstones, they were a cornerstone species to all the plains, the mountains, the water, the air, anything that you could think of, they influenced it. So I would read stories about them, and it really struck an interest. So back in 2012, we did a horseback buffalo run for 21 miles, where we pushed the bison from the from their spring pasture down to their winter pasture. And this is kind of where this all started. I didn't know it at the time, but because I got to experience riding a horse and chasing bison, I kept thinking, I wonder when the last time this actually happened, when we were able to, push bison on horseback. But then there was a lot of questions of, like, well, this is a knowledge that I think I need to, pursue.
Brandon went on to serve in the Native Science Field Center as an AmeriCorps Vista and also completed a USDA internship in college. While at the University of Montana, he learned more about modern issues affecting the integrity of natural resources.
One of them was, I think it was Clark Fork. I think that comes out of Butte, Montana. But it's a headwater that's right next to the pit. And then during that time we was there, they had a plan to start draining the pit and getting all the heavy metals out. And then they were going to use chemicals to make it seem like water. And they were putting it into to the watershed all the way to Missoula. So this is why I don't swim in there anymore, because I know where that water is coming from. And then they had to do all the tailings, all the destruction they did for over 100 years. It affected that whole region. People with cancers, and people that were getting sick a lot, but also creating an attitude to the land and to its people. So it's a conglomeration of many things of why I'm doing this now. So I came back in 2020. I got onto this internship called the Native Lands Project, and they wanted me to go out and come up with a how would you say that? A way for people to connect spiritually with bison and land. I was like, all right, well, I'll try it out. So with that experience, it actually allowed me to be on the land more, be around bison jumps, be around bison. But I really didn't know what I was looking for. It wasn't until I offered out and I prayed about it and prayed about it and prayed about it. And what came to me was pretty unique. And it brought me to different places where it was overlooked. Pieces of our past start coming into light. And it was almost like a map. But I did whatever work did with Native Lands Project, but I would not give them my information because of the intellectual property rights that they need to go out and spirit themselves. So I had to come down to a choice. If I give this information to a major university, they would copyright it and say this is their information because they gave me money. So I said no. I said I can't do it. This is the report I have for you. It was very vague. But this is all I'm going to do because of what was rediscovered. But then I seen how much more influence bison have with us. It goes down to our astrology. We have cartography in our effigies. And this map maps out the whole United States. But also some of the stories of the stars tell us certain times of when stuff is migrating. The language of the land, the songs. But also It was literally pointing to certain places that are spiritually and culturally significant to the tribe. And I couldn't see myself to give all the information out without these people experiencing what needed to be experienced before then. So it comes down to our basic understanding of the land, and those are in medicine wheels. We see basic ones, but what we rediscovered was it was way more than that, and it came down to a science. So say I were to bring somebody there and tell them everything that I know, this person can go ahead, take all the knowledge I give them, and turn it into a book and say it's theirs without ever citing me. So we were very careful on who I just give that information to, because I want them to experience it for themselves, because it's more meaningful, you know. But a lot of our stories we have can identify exactly where it happened. Our Genesis, when Mudman was created, you know where that is? It's in Badger Canyon. We have a story of where Mudman was created and Rib Woman. In the Bible, they call it Adam and Eve. It's here. So, you know, we physically can see it. We physically know where it is. You know, and it's just passed down from generation to generation.
Brandon talked more about the importance of intention and about seeking authentic experiences to cultivate cultural knowledge. Brandon talked more about the importance of intention and about seeking authentic experiences to cultivate cultural knowledge. Stories can lay the foundation for curiosity, but experiencing a place or a practice allows a person to integrate knowledge with their own memories and lay the foundation for their personal tradition. But taking the initiative to have experiences is the first place to start.
If you wait for somebody else to do it for you, well, you'll be waiting forever. If you're waiting for permission, then you'll be waiting forever. Go out and experience it. Go out and see what it is. Because if you keep waiting, then you keep waiting and waiting and waiting. Pretty soon, that person you're waiting on may pass away. Do it now, do it today. But do it with good intention, Because from what we understand is that you will be guided. You'll be guided to where you need to go to experience the knowledge, to experience, essentially, I wouldn't say you're looking for, but essentially what you need. Because if you go out asking for something, it may not be what you're asking for, but it's what you need, to get to, that understanding.
Thank you for listening to the Inca podcast. This program is supported through grant funding from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Rural Climate Smart Initiative, and the Indigenous Grazing Lands Coalition. These efforts help support grassroots producers, tribal ranchers, and the conservation partners working to strengthen stewardship across Indian country as a whole. The views expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA. To learn more about Inca and our work, visit us online and join us for the next conversation. Thank you.